All right, students, let's talk about Chapter 4 from the Dunn and Halonen book. So, here we are going to talk kind of an extension. This goes really well with Chapter 3. The skills that you will be building from your classes in psychology. So, we did touch on these. We're going to talk more specifically about them. So, what are you learning in your classes? Well, there's kind of two different ideas of how to deliver, especially college course content. So, one is the content centered approach. So, you're learning a large amount of content, it's just being delivered to you, it tends to be fairly passive. So there's a criticism that this is helping to teach to a test. So you might have exams, multiple choice exams. A lot of times I feel like my general psych classes are more of a content centered class because there's so much to go over in a general psych class. I'm just delivering a bunch of information to you and then having little tests to see if things are coming across well and you're grasping concepts. So with this, there's an idea that the learning might not endure there, and that is a valid criticism. If you're learning something and you're not reviewing it, you're not using it, you're not making it meaningful, then you're going to lose it. We've talked about different ways to help you on your end as the learner take it in and work with it, making it more meaningful. But there's other ways that instructors can help make it more meaningful as well. One of those things is to build on that information, use it for things, and that brings us to our next kind of learning approach, the learning-centered approach. So this is really focused on helping build specific skills. So a lot of the skills that we're going to talk about today in this chapter 4 are those skills that your courses are going to be trying to help you build. So with this, you're helping to build skills, you're helping to learn new things, and as you learn them, you apply them, you make them meaningful in that way. So in some ways, you might not be getting as much content, so like as big of an amount of content, so a little slower delivery of content, but hopefully as you're using these skills and building these skills with the content, hopefully that learning endures a little bit more. So let's take my general psych class for example. At least the most recent time I taught it, one of the big projects that I had was basically two small lit reviews. I called them question papers. They were really tiny. I've also in the past, I don't think I did this in general psych last time, but I've also done a group project where students teach one of the subjects, basically take a 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half hour of the class, and they teach part of the chapter that they're interested in groups. So trying to help them build skills as well as making that content meaningful. Students in other classes where someone else is teaching are getting it delivered to them slightly different ways than just from me. So that's one way to build skills. Doing the writing of a question paper is kind of like a mini lit review is kind of what I've designed it as. Doing some reading of research as they're learning about psychology in the field of the class. So it's got to be like over the most recent chapters that we've done. So you learned about social psychology, so your paper needs to be somewhere in the realm of social psychology. So which is best? This would be a good time to discuss in a classroom setting, but which is best? The real answer is it really depends. Both of them have their merits, both of them have their weaknesses. Again, if you're trying to get a big broad span of content, a basic idea of what's going on in all of psychology, a content-centered general psych class is a pretty useful tool. And so that's why you'll see a lot of freshman level courses or like 100 level courses take this approach, like give you a little sprinkling of a taste of everything that's involved in this field, and then if this is your major, you jump deeper into it and you pick some areas, and as you go like to master's or PhD, it gets even more narrow focused, right? So which is best? Both have their merits. Both are really useful for different things. Both have their weaknesses. Both are really good. And this is why I tend to use both in different ways in all of my classes. Some of my classes, I had a lab class where I taught research methods. That essentially we had a classroom session where all the students were there, and basically like an hour and a half of content delivering lecture, and then the class separated into two. So I had half of the class each time for a lab where we actually did applied things. We used the stats. We did some stats, we did some research methods, and we actually did a small research study during the course of that class. We wrote it up, analyzed it, those kinds of things. Obviously, even with one semester and a dedicated lab class, I had to cut some pieces out of there. So I already had the topic picked out. They didn't do like the full lit review kind of thing, right? Because a semester, it's not a ton of time to do, say, an entire study from start to finish. So Sage on the Stage is kind of applies well to this content-centered approach. You're delivering content as an expert, so your teacher, your professor is delivering that content. There's not necessarily as much back and forth. I try to bring in more back and forth with discussions and activities within classes, even though I think that would still be seen still as more Sage on the Stage side of things. And there's not as much individual focused training as I've been able to have with, say, a lab course where I can literally sit down with a student and work through a problem with them. So obviously you might have experienced the other day when I went through some of the lit review questions that you had. So how do I find research for my topic? We could have actually sat down, but obviously I didn't get to everybody in class, those kinds of things. So this is another kind of learning guide on the side. So a professor or your instructor or your mentor as a guide, expecting students, and this is kind of the key feature here, expecting students to do more of their own learning and practice. So the assignments might be built so that you're doing a whole lot of work outside of class. So you are doing a lot of that learning, that engaging on your own, because we can see from various research that doing both of these for different kind of content delivery and both for learning new skills is different, right? So support in Guide on the Side can be more individual. Doesn't mean it always is, right? It might be like in a group setting or training people in a smaller class than say 50 how to do a specific task or learn a skill. So oftentimes we see the things like Guide on the Side or also the learning centered approach as being high impact practices, and they are. You can see learning and engagement and building skills a lot, but that doesn't negate the need for also having a lot of content base. If you don't have a broad view of what's possible in the field of psychology, it's going to be hard to pick which field that you want if you only know one or two areas. You need to have a little bit of a taste of everything. So that's also kind of the point of general classes in general, is to get a general education, like know a little bit more about what the current field is doing beyond just like high school level classes. So what are some of the skills that we are trying to teach you, not just in my class, not just in this specific course, but in a psych department in general? Not just our psych department, but if you move on to another psych department, what are the skills that we're trying to get and instill into you so you can take them forward in whatever job you want to do? Psych focused, other kind of job focused, what are skills that we're trying to get you to build to do better in not just the job market, but other endeavors that you have? So vocabulary. So you've got a lot of psychological literacy. So you know a lot of the basic knowledge about psychology, the different areas of psychology. You probably know what a neuron is better than your friend who has not done, say, a biology class like that. You understand a lot more about science, how to do evaluation, and you can apply that knowledge in decision making. That's really relevant no matter what kind of field that you go into. Even if you're in really any field, there is studies, research, work that can be done to help people learn. So with this, you can apply psych principles in your personal work life, in civic matters. If you're like, what should we do about poverty or some other civic social problem? You can say, well, let's look what the research says. Let's see if we have valid research that suggests solutions that have been tried in places similar to my city, maybe dissimilar to my city, and see what might work here. That might help you know, well, maybe we should vote for, say, this mayor or this policy or things like that. So the psych principles that you learn generally about lifespan development, general psychology, abnormal psychology, social psychology can help you in your personal, social, organizations, so work, civic matters, personal life, all these things. And hopefully, we're hopefully training you to act ethically as well, and to keep ethics as a focus in your life. Sorry about that. I had to pause the recording really quickly. So, one of the other things that we're hoping you take from these courses is an understanding of how to behave ethically, both in research as well as just in day-to-day life, working with people. So even if you don't go into, say, a clinical practice, even if you don't go into research, hopefully you'll know how it is appropriate to treat other people when doing studies of them, when interacting with them, understanding differences that people have, and how to act ethically with them will help you as you navigate working with people. Because most of your kind of job options that you're going to be doing, whether in psychology or out, are going to be around other people. So hopefully you take that with you. It's definitely important. I've got a funny story about research specific and ethics, but I think I'll bring that up when we are talking about doing research and why we do certain things in research ethically. This is more like ethics skills in general, so not as applicable here. So another thing that you're learning is how to evaluate research. So as part of the assignment in this class of your lit review, you are reading research, and we're going to be talking more, especially towards the end of class, of how to read research, how to write in APA format. So you're going to be evaluating research and information coming from other sources. I know we've only had a really brief, or we are going to be having a really brief session on statistics and what the concepts mean, but even with that basic knowledge, you can evaluate research a lot better and have a better understanding of what any kind of paper is trying to tell you. And this is one of the biggest things that I think most of even the multiple departments that I've been in at different schools have really focused on this. And so it is a piece that the APA recommends psychology programs across the country do, but this is something that I've seen emphasized in the different departments that I've worked in. So communicating in different modes and with different audiences. So to write towards a scientific audience, I'm going to be writing a research paper. I mean, typing and writing it, you know. That's how I will deliver that information and communicate with an audience of researchers. Is that how I should communicate with an audience of middle schoolers? No, definitely not. So, learning how to communicate in different ways with different people of different literacy levels and understandings of a topic, all of this is really, really essential. I've heard it said that expertise is knowing how to take the most complicated subjects in a domain or a sphere, in a subject, and break it down to a point where someone who's a 5-year-old can understand. So I think that there's a lot to be said about being able to communicate that effectively. It's definitely a skill to build, and that's a skill we are trying to help you build as students. So writing, speaking, these are two main areas that we do a lot of work in psychology. When I go to a research conference, generally it's people speaking about something that they have written about. So they have to write, they have to speak. So that's how a lot of the science is delivered, is through writing and speaking, and we spend a lot of time in the classes on that writing and speaking. But there's other things too. There's other digital media that you can deliver information to people who have more varied literacy levels. So many jobs that you have, whether it's in psychology or out, are going to have you communicate with people who have different understandings of a topic, different literacy levels. I'm in the process of buying a new car right now. Well, a new to me car anyway. And so my literacy and understanding around cars and car parts is at a certain level. And so it's interesting to see different people speaking to me about like a car they're trying to sell, and whether or not they communicate towards my level or like pick up that, hey, I understand a little more than what you're telling me or something like that, or not. So it's interesting seeing if someone has those communication skills. Some of them don't seem to care what skills. Right now is a good time to be a seller of cars rather than a buyer of cars in general. So with that, no matter what job you're doing, you're going to be communicating with people. You're going to have people who understand psych topics or whatever topic you're bringing up at different levels. Some of them are going to understand written research articles. Probably a lot of them aren't. So is writing a lit review going to be the most appropriate thing to do? It might be a good thing for you to do have a really good understanding of this topic, and then make a really short presentation with a couple images or something, and then speak to the people's level to help them understand what you're trying to teach them. So as one example, you might do that in a workplace. So another skill that we're trying to get instilled in you is to recognize, understand, respect, and foster diversity. So that foster diversity is a big key there too. So we learn about a lot of differences in human experiences. So neurodivergence, gender, ethnicities, cultures, it's just a couple of them on the top of my head. And we learn about that in like lifespan development, we learn social psychology. Of all of our different classes, we have so much focus on the differences between people and the similarities between people. So knowing those things, the differences and similarities, can hopefully, one, help you communicate better, and build a workplace or an environment, or help a person navigate through an environment that maybe isn't built well for them. For example, if you're working with, say, specific clients, or helping your workplace be more amenable to change for people who need a little bit of adjustment and accommodation. So that is really all that there is for chapter 4. It is pretty short. I feel like I have not been talking long, but I always talk longer than I feel like I am. So I'm going to go back through and see if I forgot anything. Nope. Yep, chapter 4 is pretty short. So what are you learning? You're learning how to learn. You're learning how to communicate. You're gaining these kinds of skills that are really applicable, not just in psychology. Obviously, these are all really centered on like psychology-focused field jobs, but I think you're hard-pressed, and I think the book, maybe it's not this chapter, it might be chapter 9, but makes this point that you're going to be really hard-pressed to find a job in the world that is not relevant to psychology. You're generally going to be working with teams or groups or with people in general. Even if all you're doing is a specific task of, say, coding, you still probably have a team to interact with and plan and discuss as you go and separate your skills. So even the most separate from other people kind of job you might think of is still going to be really applicable to the skills that you're gaining. Even things like decision making or learning and being able to deliver information are going to be relevant. So hopefully you see that these skills are useful to you, not just in the psych field, but generally, because we really are trying as classes in the way we structure our courses. A little bit of behind the scenes here for you. We will come together as faculty members and plan out. So here are some of the skills we really want to build in some of these classes that you might take in your first or second semester. These tend to be classes that are taken in the second year, so like second or third semester, and then bachelor's level. In your third year, what would that now be, your sixth or seventh semester, that kind of thing. So the departments really look at what are we expecting of students at these different levels to build on these skills. So I don't expect you to come out of any one of my classes with a mastery in all of these skills, but I hope that you're getting better at all of these skills piece by piece by piece, and each course and each section in a department really focuses well, especially in the psychology department where we know a little bit about the psychology of education, to help you take these skills, build them, and have them stick for a long period of time so that you can use them because they're good, useful skills. All right, so that is chapter 4. Pretty short. Thank you, and I will see you again later.